Combox. The game lives on. Welcome to Combox. Jarrod Kimber here on the Wagon podcast, the show where we answer your questions on cricket. If you're watching live on YouTube, you can put them in the super chats. But if not, the best way to support us is via the Good Areas podcast Patreon channel, of which you can support us there. And you can ask questions beforehand, like Sinoy has said, where he says, did you come across the news of India planning to use due care for their game against Zimbabwe? If true, shouldn't that have been employed across all grounds and matches? Surely that is something the ICC can fund, so due is not a factor in the future. I don't think the due care, a due cure or whatever it's called. Is it cure? Yeah, cure. Sorry, I said care for some reason. Sorry. I don't think the due cure actually completely 100% works. It's very new. I don't know if it's been tested that well. We've seen it being used in IPL games when there were still masses of dew, and it didn't seem to have any impact at all. I know there is certainly a sort of a growing conspiracy around it, which is that India and certain IPL teams have used it to their advantage. I think I would have to see some testing to see if this thing actually works or not, and how much it does change things. I've certainly seen games that have still been affected by dew after they've used it. So I'm not quite there yet, but this is one of those things of if the ICC was a real cricket organization, what would they do? They would go off and they would check to see if this thing works. They would get some scientists involved, and then if it worked, they would be able to use it, and it would help cricket. It's not how we work, right? I've said this before. The ICC consider all this sort of stuff boring nerd talk. They don't actually want to fix the game itself. And so this is just one of those many things. Wides obviously should be done by DRS. And I've been talking about that for a long time. I was talking about the no balls being called by the third umpire maybe 5 or 6 years before it happened. I don't understand why we don't just fix the very obvious mistakes. We've still got the issue with the zombie ball, right? Where we are going to have a major cricket game very soon that is going to be decided off the last ball by a umpire making an error, giving the LBW and the ball going dead, but it going for 4 and winning again. There are obvious things that happen. Not to mention the zombie ball one, which I think they've kind of partially fixed at least. I could go on and on. There are many things that we could do to fix cricket. No one is in charge to do them, right? I think that's kind of where we are at the moment. And how do you spend the money? I don't even know how the ICC would get the funding to spend this. Someone said on one of the shows the other day, why not use Hotspot and UltraEdge, right? I think anyone who has followed cricket over the last 10 or 15 years seen both of them have strengths and both of them have weaknesses, right? UltraEdge is still picking up noises that are definitely not the ball hitting the bat. There's no doubt about that. Hotspot could be gained a little bit by putting Vaseline on the side of the bat, obviously hitting the grounds, hitting the pads, all these different things. And neither of them are perfect. Together, they are much better. So maybe they're 85% as good as you would want them to be on their own. Together, you might get it up to 94, 95%. But does anyone want to pay a big amount for Hotspot for that extra 10%? Apparently, the answer is no. Again, dew is one of those things. White cricket balls is another one of these things. I could go on and on. We can make this sport better. We actively don't try and make it better. Ubik says, are you going to the 150th anniversary test next year? Yes, probably. I mean, it's my plan to go to it. Obviously, a lot of things are going on with Combox at the moment and some other opportunities and everything else. But yeah, it's my plan at the moment to be at that test match, if at all possible. I think it's a great opportunity, to meet some of the older players as well and to celebrate test cricket. I've got a big project that I'll probably release around that time as well. So, there's a few different tie-ins that I would love to be able to do for the 150th anniversary year. So yes, definitely is something I would like to do, but, there's a long way to go between now and then. Katakaya says, what is the standard training that international umpires receive? What are generally the factors, qualities they look at when hiring umpires for the international game? So umpires are first trained on obviously sort of their knowledge of laws and how all that sort of works. Secondary, what should happen. It does happen with some of the cricket boards. I'm not sure all of them are quite at this level yet. The professionalization of umpires has been probably an under-discussed thing, but there's still a lot more that can be done. Quite often, if you're doing representative cricket or first-class cricket or whatever it may be, semi-professional cricket, there is an opportunity now to go back and actually have a look at the footage, at the games, and have a look at your decisions. And I believe that is something that plays a part. I could be wrong. I don't know if they still do this. They used to get the captains to rate the umpires, which might still exist, might not. So I'm not 100% sure, but there is definitely a situation at the moment where you can go back and have a look at it. And I know I've heard of those sorts of situations. A lot of the things they do now as well is umpires usually had to work out the best systems on their own before. So one of the reasons umpiring is kind of better at every level in cricket is that umpires now have access to little things that they didn't always know. Like, for instance, a lot of umpires will say if the ball goes up after hitting the pad, that's a very good sign that it's going over, right? If it goes to the leg side, there's all these little things that umpires are looking for. And I think through Simon Torfel, a lot of these were kind of, heaps of umpires were doing them. He didn't invent them, but he kind of put a system around them that has, from my understanding, gone around the world. And then again, they're looking at the quality of the decisions. They're looking at how umpires control a situation, which is also a very, very important thing. So there's a few different factors, I think, that play a part in the way that this goes. But yeah, we've definitely got a much better situation when it comes to umpiring than we ever did before. And we're certainly getting to a good position from that. But yeah, I think there's still a long way to go. And I think some of these other countries haven't quite fully embraced it. If you want better umpires, you kind of need to coach and train them. This idea that some countries have naturally good umpires doesn't really make sense. Abe says, listening to hardcore history on the assassination of Frank Ferdinand and how this event has an outsized impact on the course of world history by triggering World War I. What's an analog, and I can't say that word, but what's the single moment in cricket of how different does the modern game look if that never happens? Bodyline, World Series cricket, the underarm incident. No, I would say most of those are pretty small. World Series cricket is massive. I don't think bodyline changes things that much. Maybe we were on our way towards bounces, and with bodyline, we might have actually got there quicker, and bodyline kind of jumped, like it jumped an evolutionary section. World Series cricket is huge, right? Because, the IPL doesn't exist without World Series cricket. So the IPL is the other big change, but World Series cricket actually changes the way we look at the game, the way it is played, the most important formats of the game. All of those things lead into the IPL. So I would say the three most important, and this is completely off the top of my head, Abe, so apologies if I'm missing something. The three most important things are legalizing overarm deliveries, because cricket just would not be a major sport without that change. Probably then the formation of the ICC, which allows for an international cricket calendar, which takes us away from local domestic tournaments, gives us something bigger, which eventually separates cricket from all other sports. The third one is World Series cricket, and then I'd say the fourth one is the IPL, if you're putting that in. I don't know how you kind of compare World Series cricket and the IPL, because they're both, the IPL is a much bigger thing than World Series cricket, but as I said, doesn't exist if it isn't for World Series cricket. So those two are kind of similar, but I'd say those are all the ones where cricket could have been very, very different. If the ICC was set up without the need to be Commonwealth countries, I think cricket would have been quite different, for instance. There's no way this podcast would exist if cricket didn't allow overarm bowling. That would have been perhaps the worst thing that could have ever happened to the sport. And Kerry Packer made it a TV product when it had never been a TV product before, but he also supersized limited overs cricket and changed the way that we think about, we thought about the sport from that moment onwards. And then obviously the IPL will have a huge impact for however many years it needs to. Like, I don't know if it lasts forever, but it, until something like the IPL comes again, right? And if you think about it, that's kind of what happens with World Series cricket, right? From the birth of the ICC, so from the sport becomes much bigger once you can bowl over arm, right? That is the big jump that it has. Then the next big jump that it has is the formation of the international calendar. The next big jump it has is a person basically buying cricketers and colouring the game and all these different things. And then the next big jump is the actual privatization of cricket. Adjit said, sorry. What do you think was the thinking giving Sophie Molyneux the captaincy? That too across all formats. Nothing against her. I love her as a player, but with someone that is so often injured, they were literally managing a workload as a spinner in the middle of the World Cup in India. They should probably have gone for a more safe choice. I suppose if you look at recent times, Ajit, the Australian men's team also picked someone who has an injury history, who has to be rested. I think Australia are thinking about leadership very differently than perhaps we have seen traditionally, right? I think there is an element of, trying to think of the exact right words, but I think there's an element of, we actually have a theory of how cricket is played now that our entire leadership group is involved with. Yes, Steve Smith or Travis Head will captain that side. Slightly different on Mitch Marsh as well, when they kind of gave him the limit overs. But there is an ideal. We've all come to it. I think George Bailey, Andrew McDonald. There's a few different, I'm sure, lesser known people as well, analysts and all sorts of things involved in that mix. And I think they see it more that way than the traditional "you're the captain" kind of way, which is probably the future of cricket, right? Taking it away from like a one person. And yeah, I think that's probably the reason for this. I think there is a bit of a shift within Australian cricket when it comes to this. Oh, Master PPV, you have written an absolute essay. There is no way I could humanly read this out. I think someone in my department, Rakshit, has done a AI version of this. It says, why is Sachin Tendulkar's batting is called textbook if such techniques are meant to be widely teachable and repeatable? It asks why his method seemed uniquely perfect among other classical batters. Was this due to physical traits, temperament, or simply immense practice and discipline? Okay, so I think he's probably one of the last players who is what we would say textbook technique at that level, because after he comes through, everyone is a little bit more. The MCC coaching manual stops being printed, right? A long time ago now, because we realized that for 90-mile-an-hour bowlers, 95-mile-an-hour bowlers, the traditional method of elbow up and everything doesn't make sense. And then you get the limited overs cricket coming in. So players are a little bit more set up for attacking cricket than everything else. So Sachin is one of the last players. So he is almost the evolution of the technically correct player, if that's the case, right? And we may never get, as I said, another player who is technically correct in the way that he was. Even if you look at someone like AB de Villiers, who is the evolution in batting in many other ways, AB will talk about like little technical flaws that he had in his batting that I don't really think Sachin has. I mean, obviously he had trouble with the ball seaming back into him at times, but I don't think that is a technical error. I just think that that there has to be like a one way that you can sort of slow someone down, right? So yeah, I do think there is a part of that, but when it comes down to it, it's also you have to have the hand-eye coordination that he has, which is incredible. You have to have the willing to master the technique, right? So there are lots of people who can do that. There are lots of players. Kagisa Rabada technically looks fine, right? He looks like a coaching manual. He bats the correct way, but he misses the ball a lot, right? So he hasn't mastered the technique. He has the ability. So sometimes if you ever like driving past the tennis courts, right, and you know anything about tennis, sometimes you'll see someone who has a really nice ball toss and a really nice serve, right? And so they've mastered a lot of the physical attributes of that, but it doesn't go particularly fast, right? They don't have the power or the ability to be able to pull that off. So technically they're fine, right? But they don't have the eye, the physique, the hand-eye coordination, all these other things that you would also need, the strength, the timing, right? The understanding what the bowler's trying to do, all these things. And I think in Sachin's case, he's very much a 99th percentile batter in a lot of different things. There's a couple of things that he's not like 99th percentile. Like I don't think picking gaps is 99th percentile, like say Lara or Bradman are. He obviously wasn't 99th percentile in power, right? And some of these other things. But so many things when it comes to the way he batted, he was at the absolute top of that. And so I think Rahul Dravid said this for the book, The Art of Batting. I think he said that Sachin lived his whole life around batting, right? Many of the other batters that I talk about in that book did not do that. So I think in Bradman's case and Tendulkar's case specifically, you could throw in a couple of others too. Len Hutton might be another really good one to throw in there. Boycott is another one. There aren't that many people who are willing to make their entire life that one thing that they're good at. And so Sachin did do that. And as I said, he then becomes 99th percentile in some things that maybe other people were more naturally gifted at, right? And the same would be true of Bradman. But they are not just the technique, and one of them has a really good technique and one doesn't. But, you know, like as in a textbook technique, Bradman's wasn't as anywhere near as textbook as Sachin's was. But they end up being at the 99th percentile because their entire life is about making their next runs, right? And I think that is something that that's a really hard thing to do. I brought up tennis a moment ago. I talked to Barry Cowan, who was an English professional tennis player, about women's tennis a while back for a piece I was doing. I said, you know, take me through why some women retire early, right? And it's a consistent thing. And he said, look, a lot of it is to do with the fact that at 13, 14, they're already treated like adults. They're already on the professional tour. So by the time they get to 25, 26, they're becoming who they are as human beings. And they're like, all I've ever been is a tennis player. And I've already made my money. I don't need to keep doing this. And so they go off to do other things. And he said, others, they're great at something when they're 13. Doesn't mean they want to do it when they're 22, right? And he was saying that you have to really want to do it to put in the work, right? There's a fascinating thing that happened with Jake Weatherald when lockdown happened, and he decided to spend 8 hours a day practicing cricket. And there was a part of me that knew this already, but also a part of me, like, people made articles about that and talked about it. And it's a really interesting thing. Why wouldn't athletes be spending 8 hours a day working on their craft, right? But they don't. Some of it is because it's repetitive. Some of it is because they need to rest. Some of it is because they need to get away from it. Some of it is because they want to do other things, right? And so I think someone like Sachin, you know, Bradman, those sorts of guys, you know, Graham Gooch is another really good one. They just want to maximize the amount of runs they can make. That isn't the case with every single great batter. And I think that Tendulkar, that is a big part of it. His ability to not just have a great technique, but master every single part of it, and the ability to change that technique on a different surface for a different day with a minute's notice, right? That is another thing that's remarkable about him. So he's not like Callis, who's playing with the same technique over and over again. There's a lot of subtle changes within the way that Tendulkar is going about it. Let us have a break, and then when we come back, there will be more of this here Wagon Wheel. Cricket fans are smarter than ever before. But what they're offered is clickbait, lazy punditry, and SEO noise. Combox is for people who actually love the game. Smarter analysis, real conversations. Combox, the game lives on. Hayden says, why do we refer to batters as being left or right-handed, yet bowlers use their left or right arm when both skills require them to use both their left hand and their right and their arm? I think batting is the really weird one, Hayden, because at least with bowling, you can say, well, they're holding the ball in their right arm, and that's what a tennis player would do, right? And it makes a lot of sense. In cricket, you're using both hands. It makes no sense with batting to call it right-handed or left-handed, right? I think it just happened naturally in the 1800s, and no one's ever really thought about it. I mean, what you're talking about there, Hayden, is also we call it leg spin, which doesn't make sense when you're bowling to a left-hander, right? So I'm not even sure leg spin makes sense in general, because leg spin to me would be, isn't it spinning towards the legs? But it's not. It's spinning from the leg side. I don't know. So I think there's a lot of phrases that came out of that 1700s, 1800s period when people weren't probably sending as many Patreon requests into their favorite podcast hosts, right? And maybe thinking these through. But not only do I think that right-handed batting is actually like it shouldn't be called that because it is used two hands. I also believe that people who are naturally right-hand dominant should be standing on the other side of the bat, and people who are naturally left-hand dominant should be standing on the other side of the bat. So I would argue that not only did we make a mistake in naming it, we then also made a mistake in which side that we called for which. There's no way they would have known this in the 1700s or 1800s, but there's lots of proof now that there are a lot of the best left-handers of all time are actually right-handers, right? And that having your stronger hand on the top of the bat rather than underneath. And I tried to teach myself this at 12 or 13, so I believed in this for a very long time. And with the bowling, I'm less worried about Hayden because I still think you are using your right arm to actually deliver the ball. So I'm okay with that. But with batting, no, I don't really completely get it. Average says, why couldn't West Indies quicks trouble Samson with that short ball? Pitch conditions, or did Samson change something? Archer would go for that plan in the semi, surely, wouldn't he? Yeah, I think Archer has a particular delivery that bothers Samson. And I think it's the back of a length bounce that he gets at pace. The West Indies don't have a bowler like that. Shamar Joseph is quick, but he's skiddy. Jason Holder can get the bounce, but it's not at that kind of pace. And Matthew Ford is just not tall enough or strong enough or fast enough to be able to bowl that ball, right? So you actually need a particular kind of bowler for that plan against Sanju Samson. I thought they tried to go into the wicket and it didn't even affect him because it just wasn't the right kind of bowler. So, a lot of these things are, we hear this a lot of, oh, this is the plan. It's like, yeah, that is the plan if you have the right kind of bowlers to execute the plan, right? So we'll hear someone go, oh, he doesn't play left arm finger spin very well, so let's bring on a left arm finger spinner. It might be that it's the left arm finger spinners who put a lot of sideways revolutions on the ball that he doesn't play, rather than the ones who put more overspin on the ball. It might be the angler guys he doesn't like, where it's actually when the ball keeps coming into him, rather than the guys who actually spin the ball away consistently. These things are much more nuanced than just bowl short at Sanju Samson. He would not be playing international cricket if you just had to bowl short at him every single time to get him out, right? Average says, imagine sending Virat Kohli out in a T20 with no scoreboard or overshown. Does that free him into a pure death hitting mode, no anchoring, or strip away his edge and match awareness? Who benefits the most from that blackout? AB, Maxwell, more than MSD? I think that, there's a thing that they do in for fast bowlers, right? When they want to work out someone's natural run up, they put a blindfold around them and get them just to run in and bowl. And I think you kind of find your natural method. I think Virat and MS, their natural method is probably much more calculated than AB and Maxwell, right? So I don't know if that actually helps them as much as you think it does, because they're still like MS Dhoni, his ability to read a situation, analytically, naturally is, does he need a scoreboard? Is what I'm saying. Like, he's still going to work out roughly what he needs to do, is my guess. And Virat being so much better in the second innings than the first innings, again, tells me that there's almost a mathematical part of that, right? That he's working it through. So I don't think taking the scoreboard away takes away their version of thinking. Maybe if there was never any scoreboard, right? But once they've played with a scoreboard once or twice, I don't think that actually goes in the same way. Virat's still going to be thinking, I can't lose wickets here because I don't trust the number 4 or the number 5 or the number 6, right? Having the scoreboard there or not is not going to change that. And MS is still going to think that he has the ability to hit multiple sixes at the end if they get behind in any situation. Why would he put extra pressure on himself at the moment to do that, where he has to force it? Whereas at the end, when the other team is going to be tired and maybe there's a little bit of dew or whatever, and he can put all of his energy into that one section rather than trying to hit sixes all the way through like someone else would. Mob says, to Bayram's great junction? The ICC have rebranded. Oh, yeah. Yeah. The ICC have rebranded the power play, middle overs, and death into launch, consolidate, accelerate, and finish. Besides shifting the focus from neutral terms to the batter's exclusive perspective, it seems as though modern T20 winners do not even bother with the consolidate part of this equation. Does it show how out of touch the ICC are? There is an element here that I completely agree with. I'll tell you what it is. When I first started doing analysis, I realized instantly that the middle is not as simple as what people say it is. There are, and what we were calling it was early middle, late middle at that stage. I think when I was writing for Cricinfo back in 2018, 2019, that's what I started calling it. Because the early middle is a bit of a traditional consolidate. But the late middle clearly wasn't. You could see the runs. They were not playing them like they were middle overs. So power play, early middle, late middle, death maybe just sounded silly. And I think if you're doing analysis, we start to do it a little bit more now as well, where we kind of split those up. And I kind of lost that battle back 8 years ago now, because no one else wanted to do it. But I think myself, and I think maybe Crickfizz even at that time, were like, the middle is not the middle, right? And there were even some places who were saying the death started at the 14th over and others at the 16th because they were trying to grapple with this. The issue that I have is everyone in cricket knows it's the power play. Does the launch actually make more sense now? Like, if you're trying to get to neutrals, which I'm assuming what this is for, more neutral, casual fan, does that actually help? That term? This is the launch. Launch of what? It's the beginning. Okay. But I'm not even sure the launch is the right word. Consolidate, as you said, a lot of teams don't consolidate there anymore. Accelerate, couldn't you also assume they're accelerating in the launch? Finish, fine. The death is a more beautiful term. Like, it's a lovelier term. I just think they probably got this one wrong. I'd be shocked if it takes over, but you never know. I mean, TV companies have the power. Like, someone like me would have to say something for like 7 years to get it into action, generally. TV companies, if a couple of them all decide that they like this, could change. But it's not right. I think that's your major point, Mob. Again, with Mob, he says, we have a situation where the T20 World Cup and IPL are being played in the same conditions within a month of each other. This seems like a rare scientific opportunity. What would it mean for a player to perform well in the World Cup and then bomb in the IPL or vice versa? What would it mean for the ICC if the bands of runs scored or wickets taken on pitches vary significantly? It will be different. There's no doubt it will be different. We will see a lot more runs in the IPL. The IPL is set up as purely as an entertainment product. The World Cup is still set up as a sporting league. Like, there's supposed to be some level of parity occasionally. There's parity in the IPL, but in a different way, of course, in the way that the teams are set up. But they want as many fours and sixes in the IPL. They've gone absolutely out of their way to set it up to have as many fours and sixes as possible. They haven't always been the highest scoring league, but I think they have been now for quite a while. That's not a mistake. That's a decision. The ICC doesn't want that. ICC wants fairer for bat and ball, seeing it more of as a cricket tournament than as an entertainment product. So they will be different, and they should be different, I think. And I actually don't think they should be the same. They don't have the same outcomes in mind. Rolls said, you mentioned on last week's Wagon Wheel that an English player wrongly called Adil Rashid a roller. Yes. I think it was actually an English media person, but it was a former player. It was a couple of former players. I'd never heard that term before. Are there any other terms widely used by pros that we think we might not know or be aware of? I mean, this is a tricky one because, like, there's hundreds, really. I'm trying to think of phrases that they would use. Clean skin, for when you don't have a sticker on a bat. is probably one. Australian cricketers call their spikes sprigs. Those sort of Krunal Pandya-like bowlers, you quite often hear them referred to as sliders. Sort of slider bowlers. I've heard a few players do that. Trying to think of anywhere else. I always thought one of the funny ones was like people who don't like progression got upset when some of us started calling third man third, and they were like, "Oh, I can't believe you're saying third and not third man." And I'm like, I've not had an interview with a cricketer in the last 10 years where they haven't referred to that position as third, not third man. It just naturally evolved beyond the man part of it. It was not wokeness. It's just how it went. Like, for instance, the opposite one is the deep backward point, which is instead of being called deep backward point, it's called the chop out man. So that one's had a man put in, and the other one had a man taken away. I'm trying to think of anything else. Yes, clean skin's one of my favorites. I'm trying to think. If there are any others. I mean, heavy ball is one that comes out of, just cricketers talking, right? Scrambled seam into wobble ball. Those were two more. Whereas I think some of the more mystery spin deliveries originally, there was like a Sri Lankan guy who was naming all of them, right? And coming up with them. Those are the ones off the top of my head. I'm sure there's hundreds more. Josh says, what role position has been New Zealand's biggest weakness in the T20 World Cup? If New Zealand had an informed Trent Boult instead of Duffy, Jamieson, Sodhi, would they be the second best team on paper after India? Yeah, I think you have a bit of a natural flap, though, if you have Henry and Boult, because, you can't get as much out of both of them, which is probably the issue with Duffy. What they really need is probably not Boult, as good a player as he is, just because they already kind of have that role taken over. I think what they really need is a bowler who can bowl in the power play, but is actually a death specialist, right? So I'm trying to think if they've had one over the last couple of years. Even someone like Southey, right, who not a great T20 player, but a handy T20 player. But if he could bowl over 2 and maybe over 4, and then could come back at the death, I think one of their big issues is Jamieson, Duffy, Henry, none of them are really lockdown death bowlers. And Lockie, you want to use him in the middle. You don't really want him to be your lockdown death bowler, right? I'm not saying he can't do it, but you don't want that. I'd say that's probably the biggest issue that they have. And I can't think of anyone off the top of my head from New Zealand who kind of fits that role at the moment, unless I'm just misremembering someone. Adityan says, you mentioned Abhishek was on fire a month back and thus does not make any sense to say he's being found out in this World Cup. But wasn't there this cricket and stuff article on bowling well outside off about 2 months back? Wasn't that literally the article that picked up on his slashing and getting caught on the offside problem against pace? Well, I mean, everyone knew about that problem. I mean, England were bowling him to that way a year earlier. Also, was he ever required to start against spin that much as an opener before this World Cup? He plays in the IPL. He used to be a bat in the middle order. He started against spin a lot. I think because of the way he plays, there's a lot of people who want to say it's the end. If you are taking 7 or 8 innings, right? It's probably not even that many because he was sick. If you're taking 7 or 8 innings as being found out, I think that that means that you're looking for something. It doesn't mean that I honestly think that means you are looking for an answer to the fact that you don't think he should have made as many runs as he has been so far. I mean, the idea that an article came out and then he started doing this. We talked about bowling wide to Abhishek before. I've talked to some of the bowlers who've bowled to him about that tactic well before this. Also, that article you're talking about, what was it around for South Africa and New Zealand to find as well? They've got professional analysts who are looking at footage of him, and I think we all knew it. I think some of the fields have changed a little bit, but I've seen those fields bowl to him in the IPL. I've seen those fields bowl to him in international cricket, and he still smashed them with the same lines, the same lengths. He was sick, so he's in the form of his life, right? He's then sick, hospitalized sick, right? He can't be at full capacity at the moment. Not saying that it's anything else, but he can't be at full capacity. He also probably lost his flow, right? On top of that, these aren't the wickets that he has been dominating. The wickets that he's been dominating, which I think is the bigger question here, is can he keep doing what he does on more bowler-friendly wickets consistently, right? Not that he can't do it on bowler-friendly wickets, because of course he can. But is his game set up more for the very, very flat pitches, right? And is it not set up as well for when the wicket's just doing a little bit, right? Whether the ball is holding and everything else. But if you were to say that he's found out based on this, I just think that I'd be shocked. Now, in a year's time, if he hasn't made any runs, maybe that's the case, right? Like, you know, it's always possible. Also, he's going to have change. Also, what happens sometimes is you get a player, it's not even about them being found out. They are smashing the ball everywhere, doing whatever they want. And then suddenly they have their first blip. And sometimes they start to not believe in themselves. And if you're playing the way he is, you have to believe in yourself, like at a level that is ridiculous. Because if you don't, you can do that. But realistically, he's been sick and it's been like less than 10 games. I'm absolutely dumbfounded that this is even a question. And I've talked about this before. Indian fans expect this sort of level of performance at all times from their players. It's just normal form. Most things are just normal form. So someone like Abhishek, and I'm not saying his illness had anything to do with this, but someone like Abhishek can have like a tiny pain in his knee. It does not stop him batting, but he has a tiny pain in his knee. That means that his bat, when it's going back in his pickup, doesn't go back on the same angle. Right? That could completely throw him out of rhythm. It could be anything, right? Let's give it a little bit longer than a World Cup where he was in hospital. All right, let's have a quick break, and after the break, more. We love the game, but we love the stories. Fans have stories. Former players have stories. Journalists have stories as well. Combox brings them all together. The game lives on. Welcome back to Combox. This is the Wagon Wheel Show. Oh, and I still have a Dittian's question here. What else do we have here? Hurt says, are there any new ideas or metrics to track the quantity and quantify the usage of a player? Easy, having to bowl the tough overs, being someone to break the threatening partnerships, being promoted to stabilize it. Is there still a gap on how we remember a player and what his stats may say? This is one of those things. This is kind of, does he do it when it's at its toughest? The best players with the best stats usually have to do the toughest jobs, right? Jasper Bumrah has to bowl more tough overs than Romario Shepherd, right? Because that's his role. His role is the end of the power play and the end of the game. And if India need a wicket, he comes back on. But he's also doing that role because he already has the best stats. So he's probably already the best player. There are probably some players who are the best player in their team, but their team's not very good, who maybe have their stats affected by doing the tougher roles. Like, the great John Reid from New Zealand, the original John Reid from New Zealand, maybe I should say, who probably would have been an incredible number 5, number 6, could have even been their wicketkeeper, could have been their 5th bowler, whatever they needed. And instead had to bat too high up the order with the top order that always went out, right? That affected his stats. I think that's probably fair to say. But we have to do that contextually, Hurts, right? But there are also metrics to be able to work that out. Like if you're in a team like that, you can work out a median entry point, right? So we have the ability to do those sorts of things. What we can do in T20 cricket is we have the ability to know what the expected outcome of that next over is, considering what the score is, what the players are involved in, what the ground is, and everything else. And so if you regularly go under that if the expected over for the 17th is 9.7 runs, and in the 17th over you're going at 7.2 runs, it's a tough over. So your 7.2 is a plus 2.5 on that metric, right? We have plenty of ways to be able to do that. Impact metrics and all sorts of things. They're not wildly used, but we use some of them as well. But if you're bowling the toughest overs, that's why things like true wickets, true economy, makes sense, because if you're bowling the over that's the toughest and you're regularly doing better at it, that's a better way of looking at it. So yeah, that's kind of what we do at Good Areas. And we're not the only ones, of course. The Deeka says, you have a chance to travel in a time machine to see one of these players in their prime. Which one would you choose? Victor Trumper, W.G. Grace, or Alfred Min? I think I would pick Trumper because he sounds like the most fun to watch. Perhaps the most important one is a W.G. Grace, just because kind of builds modern batting. And Alfred Min, I'd be interested in. Less so Alfred Min, although I would be interested in him as well. But I'd be more interested in the just what batting looked like at that stage. But I think that, like, the kind of cricket that I enjoy the most is attacking, and of those three, Trumper was the attacking player. Ian says, without IPL owners ban, how many Pakistani players should play in the 100 this summer? And if your answer is very low, how difficult does it become to prove that they were left out as a part of the policy? That is an issue. They're playing not very good cricket. I think we worked it out on, we did a TalkSport show. I don't know if the episode's out, but we did a TalkSport episode about this. It wasn't that hard to get to about 8 or 10, right? Like, the 100 is not the IPL. There aren't that many, I don't know, 6'5", 85 mile an hour left arm swing bowlers, right? There aren't that many Nazim Shahs around in English cricket. Shadab Khan, Mohammad Nawaz, Farhan, there are players out there that are quite handy for that. But yeah, it's probably, I'd have to have a look at who the other overseas players are. But off the top of my head, I would say that there's about 8 Pakistani quality players that could play in the 100 off the top of my head. PJ says, Craig Kieswetter, if he doesn't get pinned in the eye, does he still have an English career in the more modern era? How does his career pan out? He just turned 38. Yeah, I think we get this question about every few months. I always thought, I always thought that he was not as good as Matt Pryor. Obviously, he's a bit younger than Matt Pryor as well. I just thought he wasn't as repeatable as a player in the way that Matt Pryor was. So I suppose that he would have been behind Matt Pryor, and then when he comes out of that sort of Matt Pryor era, he's going up against Bairstow and Butler. That's again tricky. I think both of them are better bats than him again. I think he has, I'm just looking up now. Yeah, he averages 39 in first class cricket, which would certainly be better than Butler. Probably not at Bairstow's level, although I don't know Bairstow's number off the top of my head. I think he would have struggled to get in consistently. What is fascinating is, when does he start playing? What would be fascinating might be to go back and look at his Pro 40 career, which he would have had a couple of years of, I would have thought. Yeah. It'd be interesting to signal out to sort of scalpel those out, because a lot of the guys who went on to win the World Cup in 2019, you can see in their Pro 40 data just the beasts that they were. And that weirdly didn't always come out in their 50 over cricket. And even at times in their 20 over cricket. For whatever reason, that whole 2019, the whole white ball, revolution, as much as it was built on, Trevor Bayliss and Owen Morgan and, copying Brendan McCullum and all this, a lot of it was those guys were already doing it. It's just that people hadn't really picked them. So I'd have to have a look at Kieswetter's numbers for that. But we certainly were robbed of a very, very talented player. It's just that in a country full of wicketkeepers, I don't know how Kieswetter always would have fit in. Everyone's a wicketkeeper here. Adityan says, I don't think Samson has a very strong case for being a better IPL bat than Kohli. But by how much? Given someone who's been playing that brand of cricket all the way from late 2010s, what should they have done to be rated above Kohli? I mean, that's one thing I'd have to really go through the numbers on that. I'm just trying to have a look. If we just have a look at his T20 numbers, one of his big problems in IPL is the fact that he starts every season like he is better than Kohli and finishes every season like he is worse than most people. I think if you look at his entire career, there's a lot of years at the start, which I'm assuming Kohli doesn't have without going through Kohli's numbers. There's a lot of years at the start where he's averaging in the 20s with quite a low strike rate. He then works out from 2017 onwards of how to keep a strike rate of about 140 to 155, I suppose at best, while averaging around 30. There's a couple of years there where he goes through. I think if to be rated above Kohli, you probably I'm not going to go through Kohli's record, but you probably have to go through Kohli's record and be like, I don't think Kohli's early years would have been as poor. Kohli's probably going to have a lot more big average years, and because Kohli can actually catch up, right? So his strike rate probably doesn't look that much worse than Sanju Samson's overall, right? It's just that we know with Sanju Samson, it's because he's putting his foot down, and with Kohli, it's quite often because he catches up later or after the power play, after he has his dip anyway. But yeah, I think it's mostly Samson would either have to be a lot quicker than Kohli, which I don't think he is, or he would have to probably have averaged closer to 30 for a longer period of time. And neither of those two things are quite true. James says, Kohli, Smith, Bubba, and Williamson all used to be weak T20 players because they scored too slowly. What in their games mentalities has made Kohli and Smith able to improve and become plus players, but Williamson and Bubba unable to? I don't think it's about the game, because I think all four of those guys can score at 2 runs a ball when required at the death. We did this in our group recently when someone questioned me, and I was like, I'm pretty sure I've checked Bubba before. He could score roughly at 2 runs a ball, like a slower 2 runs a ball, like as in a 190 compared to a 210 like some other guys. But 190 is fine. Like when he wants to hit, he could score really quickly. He just doesn't want to do it. I think in Bubba's case, we've talked about this a lot, James. I really do think that the entire situation that he's been in, from the kind of fans he's had, the way that Pakistan cricket has been at that time, the team that they had, like the amount of coaches he's had, I don't think he really trusts anyone in the setup anymore, and maybe hasn't for a long period of time. I just think that he's like, I know how to do this, and I can do this, and I'm going to keep doing this. And I think there is an element of that with all four of these guys at different times. And Kohli was very similar. He might be a more naturally gifted T20 player than Bubba, but Kohli was another one who kept saying, oh, the analysts are wrong, the analysts are wrong. And now he bats this way. He goes, see, I told you I could do this, and he has to go at the analysts. And it's like, but this is what we wanted you to do, right? So I think with some of those guys, they came in as non-T20 players mentally because they weren't. They grew up on one-day cricket. And so that is the way that they kind of went about it. In Smith's case, it took a very long time to suddenly realize that he just wasn't going to play for Australia anymore. And so he had to do something if he wanted to play in the Olympics. I think in Kohli's case, it would be impossible for Kohli to keep playing at the same strike rate that he was before in a league that is the fastest scoring league in the world. Right, like he had to, and as I said, I think he's a more natural aggressive player than Bubba anyway. Like I think we've seen that in all formats of the game. Williamson, I wonder if Williamson actually, some of it is mentality. Yeah, I don't know with Williamson. I'd love to chat to him about it. I think it's fascinating. I do wonder if at the period he might have been able to score quicker is when the elbow went as well. But I don't think that justifies some of the strike rates in the power play. He really truly believes that's the way to play for him. Simon says, commentators talk about X ball's a heavy ball. What do they mean by this? And does it have any real meaning in terms of the physics of what the ball is doing? We talked about this before. I've actually done a whole podcast, Simon, and I do think I talk about, a whole video on it and a podcast probably. And we do talk about the heavy ball a little bit. Essentially, the heavy ball, I think, is a combination of 3 things. A little bit has to do with height. If you are regularly, if you're tall, you're regularly hitting higher up on the bat, and it makes the ball feel like it's a little bit heavier. It also has to do with strength. Quite often the bowlers that we hear about bowling the heaviest balls are that sort of Fred Flintoff, Ryan Harris, stronger guys. And then the third thing is the backspin that you can put on the ball. So this is what Ian O'Brien told me. He did lots of tests on this. I have to take his word for it, but I've heard other bowlers talk about this as well. If you can put extra backspin on the ball, it means it sort of sits up a little bit more at times, and it hits higher on the blade, which feels heavier as well. Sino says, is Cameron Green the most overrated active cricketer in the world at the moment? No, he's not overrated. I've said this 1,000 times, Sino. All-rounders take longer to develop. He still doesn't even know what his best delivery is, right? His batting and his bowling, he has not spent as much time on his batting or his bowling as a young fast bowler would or as a young specialist batter would. It takes longer to develop. You could have asked the same question of Ravi Jadeja at a similar age curve, right? Of Imran Khan, of Dan Vittori, of Ravi Shastri, probably. I'd have to go and have a look at Ravi Shastri. No, probably not, because he came in as more of a bowler, didn't he? But, you know, you could ask that of many different people, of many different all-rounders. It's quite common. Ian O'Brien, in both of them, Ian O'Brien was not an all-rounder. Ian Botham is probably a rarer case of someone just being very good at both skills when he first begins. Garfield Sobers doesn't really become a frontline bowler until he's 27, 28, I want to say. It's kind of a fifth spinner for a long period of time there, and then suddenly starts bowling, you know, fast medium swingers and everyone, and becomes their new ball bowler. Even Callis, right? Callis has a worse start to his career than Temba Bavuma, I want to say. And I would say Callis's development was quicker than a lot of all-rounders. Steve Waugh, how long did it take for Steve Waugh to make 100? Was it 4 or 5 years in Test cricket? It's very common, mate. Very, very common. Ubik says, which Australian bowler from the past 10 years who never played Test cricket do you think could have had the most successful run in Test cricket? Billy Stanlake. I still think Billy Stanlake could have been one of the great cricketers, and I don't know if he just couldn't be repeatable. I suppose if it's last 10 years, I wouldn't have Bert Cockley in it because he would have been out of that. But I think Bert Cockley is probably another guy that you kind of think of. Did Chris Tremaine play a game? I think he did, didn't he? I'm trying to think of people who didn't play. Did he play a test? He played 4 ODIs, so he never played tests. Did you say tests? Yeah. I always thought Chris Tremaine was a fantastic bowler. What he ended up with 353 wickets at 23. I mean, it's a pretty good record to not play a test match. Yeah, those are the ones I think of. I'm trying to think if there's another Shield bowler who took a whole bunch of wickets. There's another one that's probably slightly further back, which is Steve McGoffin, who maybe was just a little bit too slow. Yeah, he's a bit further back. What's he ended up with? 597 wickets at 23. I thought he was a fantastic bowler. Look, Australia definitely, especially in this era, has gone away from skill bowlers to pace bowlers. Boland is kind of like, the missing one. But I remember like watching Tremaine and Boland bowl together, and I don't remember thinking Boland's great and Tremaine's not. Like, I remember thinking they were both fantastic. I'd have to go back and have a look at that period, but I assume Victoria were pretty successful when they were bowling together. So yeah, those are the ones that come to mind. Abe says, sorry if you've addressed this already. I've addressed everything already. But what exactly was Samson doing with his tapping feet yesterday, and how do you think that helped him? I think we talked about the sort of micro movements that he had. It could have. So sometimes what happens is you are looking for something that maybe has worked for you in a session or in a previous game as almost like a positive. So it might be that it didn't do anything, is my point. And it could just be that it's, something that makes him feel like he felt in another innings. It could also be something he was working on with the coach to get his feet into a better position. But yeah, I haven't heard him talk about it. So sorry, Abe, if I've missed it and he's already talked about it. But yeah, you quite often see like little bits of that. It's just that now we have the cameras up a lot closer, so everyone sort of picks them up rather than just, cricketers and analysts, I suppose, in the old days. Ajit says, who do you think is the best scooper of the ball amongst current batters? This might be a hot take, but for me, it's Georgia Vole. She plays it so often, it's almost a release shot. Was it Scott Edwards at one stage? Was it Scott Edwards from Netherlands? There was a Netherlands batter. No, it wasn't him. There was a Netherlands batter who I think had the highest ratio I'd ever seen. And then there was a Sri Lankan batter. The guy got caught. No. Was it a guy involved in match fixing? But he was from a couple of years ago. I can't remember his name. I've met him too, and I should remember him. But yeah, there was those were the two that when I did the data probably played it the most. George Vol is, I can see why. I think probably the best ones are the people who do generate their own pace on it, because once you get a reputation of being a scooper, people just bowl more slower balls to you, right? And so I do think that next generation now is the ones who have the ability to actually follow through. It's a good question. I'm not sure I have a great answer for it, actually. A couple of years ago, I did a big video on it. It's such a rare shot that it's hard to get data on. Master PPV says, we obviously got and still get plenty of Lara versus Sachin comparisons, but what about a detailed analysis of the similarities and differences between Lara and Viv Richards? Is it just not as interesting? I feel like there could be something similar to the Smith, Sachin, or Kohli Ponting piece there. Yeah, we've got a whole bunch of those planned. We just haven't had time to get them out at the moment. Lara and Viv are very different. I think the reason that we put Smith and Sachin together is that they were two guys who got the absolute most out of their batting. The reason we put Kohli and Ponting together is they are two guys who like facing fast bowling and using attack as a form of defense. So we were trying to pair up players who were kind of similar to each other. So I don't know who you pair up with Lara, honestly. Lara is sobers maybe more than Viv. And who you pair up Viv with in that situation? Because Sehwag doesn't, and Hayden don't feel fair to them to be up against Viv. Yeah, but that was one of the things that we were looking at doing. So we'll probably have more of those. We just haven't had a chance. But it's something that we really want to have a look at more broadly. It's kind of explaining why each great is is fantastic, and we've talked about it a little bit on the show before as well about wanting to do the skill scale readings, but like in a much more detailed way when it comes to players, and that might be something that we bring into these. But I wouldn't have done Lara and Richards. I think part of the reason Lara and Sachin is just because they were the two best players at the same time, right? Like the Fab Four are all compared to each other, and the Fab Four aren't really that similar, right? Maybe Root and Williamson are the two similar ones in that. But if you have that sort of situation, I think you get compared to each other. But I think I'd love to look at Boycott and Gavaskar. I think I would like to look at Lara and Sobers. I'm trying to think of some of the others that we were looking at doing. Williamson and Crow is another one that we really wanted to look at. So I think there's a few different ones out there that we haven't got to yet. Hurt says, while players like Hardik and Farhan muscle the ball out of their side, Abhishek hits beautiful parabolas. Is it fair to say that players like Abhishek are more vulnerable to variance in pace and pitch? How do they adjust and deploy their swing optimally so their parabolas don't end up in fielders' hands? No, because I think if you're like Hardik and Farhan and you're trying to muscle things, you're not actually timing the ball. I mean, the players... I did this piece years ago for Cricket Info during the 2016 World Cup where I was trying to say that what we're seeing really is there are players who sort of strike sixes, which may, through timing, who are not necessarily muscular. And then there are players who are more muscular, who can have great timing. And so I think Abhishek is probably one of those more timing orientated players, but he's doing it with an incredible high intent ability, and then he can hit sixes anywhere, right? I think if you're hitting the ball in the air as hard as he does, it's actually very hard. There's a reason why he doesn't get caught as much as other players who hit the ball in the air at the moment. And I think it's because when you're hitting it that sweetly as often as he does, I don't think you need to really worry about the fielders all that much, right? So whereas when you are muscling the ball, so if you think of guys like Stoinis, Mitchell, Hardik, Farhan, when you're muscling the ball, you're using your strength quite a bit, but there is a very big chance it's not going to be hitting the sweet spot as much compared to some of these other players who are probably sweet spot mining. And I think that's what Abhishek's doing, right? He's sweet spot mining a little bit more. Whereas that sort of Gale style is a little bit more a strength-based clubbing of the ball. So they both have weaknesses, because I think when you do that, you're taking a lot more energy out of yourself to play that than you are a nice natural swing. You'll also quite often grip the bat a bit too hard. So I don't think there's like one perfect way of doing it. I think they both have strengths and weaknesses. James says, would Crawley and Bashir have counter contracts if they did play for England? I would have thought Bashir would have, because there aren't that many spinners like him out there. Whether he plays regularly is a bigger question. I think I've seen lots of Crawleys. I mean, the batting average is low. It's a good question, James. I think they both still are in county setups. But yeah, you know, there are certainly players who make more runs than them and take more wickets than them who struggle. But the kinds of players they are still maybe a little bit rarer. Like, you know, in Crawley's case, to have an attacking opener who's probably a slightly rarer thing in the UK, right? And Bashir to be a tall finger spinner who actually rips it, again, is not something you see everywhere in the UK. PJ says, how many cricket writers are employed full-time by newspapers in the UK and Australia? The UK would have every newspaper except for the every national newspaper except for one, which is the left-wing one, I always forget the name of, has a cricket writer, but the Independent doesn't quite exist anymore, and the Evening Standard doesn't quite exist anymore. So they would have had individual cricket writers back in the day, Tom Colomossi, Stephen Brinkley. As far as I'm aware, no one is full-time cricket writer for the Independent, unless Sonia is doing it, and I haven't been on tour enough. But I don't think she does it full-time, but I'd have to check. I think when other people had that job, they weren't full-time, the one that she was in, on cricket, I should say. So you're down a couple there because those things don't really exist anymore. The Telegraph still has like a bunch, right? Shield, Wigmore, Holt, you know, I won't name them all. The Times still has a bunch. The Guardian has Ali Martin, and I suppose traditionally the Guardian would have had, what, 3 or 4? And really has one with a bunch of general sports guys coming in. To be fair, 3 general sports guys who do like and know cricket, but general sports guys. So yeah, so that is probably thinned out. Telegraph probably has slightly less than it would have used in the old days. The Times probably has more or less what I had when I started. So yeah, so it's probably down 30 to 40% from when I started my career in 2008-9. Is off the top of my head in England. Australia doesn't really have full-time cricket writers. Brettig is one for a newspaper. Is there another full-time cricket writer in Australia for a newspaper? I would say all the rest would work for Cricinfo, CricBuzz, cricket.com.au, the Cricket Australia website. And now would be, I would say, I've said this before, but I think Substack through Gideon, the Gideon, Sam, and Peter Lawler group, of which I've just completely forgotten the name of their Substack, sorry. But they probably have more full-time cricket writers than all of the rest of Australian newspapers, I would have thought. Cricket Tetel, there it is. I don't know why I forgot that name. So yeah, I would say, but that was the case before. There weren't actually that many. The reason I moved to the UK is because there were no jobs for me to take. Bryden Coverdale had a job. Peter English had a job. They were both at Cricinfo. There was no CricBuzz back in those days. Cricket.com.au didn't exist in those days. And no newspapers had full-time cricket writers. I think Crash Craddock would have been one, maybe. I don't know if he does a little bit of rugby as well. But Peter Lawler, up until leaving the newspaper, would have been writing on the Sydney Swans. And they, maybe Malcolm Conn at various times. Like, the whole time I've covered Australian cricket, that's been the case. This isn't a new thing at all in Australia. It's a much newer thing in the UK. What you're seeing in the UK, though, is these other jobs coming up, which are, I want to say they're cricket content, but they're not called that. They're called like cricket meme or theme. There's a term that they use, but these people work for companies, and they just basically go through looking at podcasts and everything else. You get lots of them in India. I don't think it's as much of a big thing in some of the other cricket countries, from what I could tell, but they're looking at podcasts, they're looking at Twitter feeds, they're looking at YouTube videos, they're looking at whatever, and just writing articles based on this over and over again. That didn't even exist when I started. But yeah, I think the big difference in cricket that I have noticed, certainly in Australia and England, is that freelance has gone. But freelance sports media basically died in COVID for a lot of different sports. And so I don't think that is necessarily, I think that was more that people realized they were spending a lot on freelance budgets and maybe not asking their own staff to do the work. So I do think there was an element of that involved. I mean, I just think, not just cricket media, but right across sports media, journalists have not been used to the best of their abilities in multiple different ways over the years. That, for me, I think that's why people say, oh, you work so much hard. And I'm like, no, I just think this is what the job should be. And that's not how a lot of my colleagues were brought up, right? Which is probably why they look at me like, why is he doing so much work? But yeah, so I don't know how many actual full-time cricket writers there would be across England and Australia. Oh, we haven't mentioned the magazines as well. It's probably about 24. There are full-time. You say that you assume that there's no more in the rest of the English-speaking world. New Zealand have Dylan Cleaver, I suppose, but he does rugby and cricket. He would be the closest. Nathan Johns does cricket and rugby in Ireland. DeSigo in Ireland, I think he's freelance now. West Indies doesn't have a full-time cricket writer that I am aware of. South Africa does, though. I don't know if you count that as the English-speaking world, but South Africa has quite a few cricket writers. South Africa is actually, I would say, in my career, has had a lot more cricket writers than Australia at times, partly because of the way the Australian newspaper situation is as well. It's basically owned by two different companies, and so, there's an issue there. But yeah, South Africa would have what? Telford, Firdose, Manners, probably about another 3 or 4, Tristan and Crickbuzz. So yeah, there's actually quite a few, I think, there. And then, but England is certainly the one in the West that has the most. And then India has an absolute truckload. India always has seemed to have a lot, but there just aren't as many cricket writers anymore, right? Like a lot of people like, am I still classified as a cricket writer? Is Neil Manthorpe still like, we both think of ourselves as writers, but is that even how we're looked at anymore? Is Adam Collins a cricket writer anymore, right? If so, there's a couple more. It's a very, you look at guys like Sid Monga, who never wanted to do any video or whatever. And now Sid Monga is just like, oh, I like this commentary thing. Peter Lawler was a cricket writer who became like a commentator and a podcaster, right? He used to make fun of me for having a podcast when I started. So I think it has changed that dramatically, but that isn't just in cricket. That does feel like everywhere, right? So I do think there's a part of that as well. All right, let us get to the super chats and then head on out. Oh, we got a few. Oh, Jessica coming in with the big bangs, as always. Thank you very much. Northern Suburbs finest. Dovetail says, since IPL team being owned by PE firm, GT by CVC, and RCB getting bid from Glazers, do you think we'll see owners building their own stadium in the USA or football? So as I understand it at the moment, Dovetail, it's actually very hard to own an IPL team and own the stadium that it is in. And I won't get. I actually weirdly, I was researching something else and this came up. But the way that Modi and IMG set this up was that they didn't have to do that and that they wouldn't get themselves into debt the way that quite often American and European owners get themselves into debt. But I do think in the future, I'm with you. I think it will probably come in naturally because I want to own the stadium and everything else to do with it. I don't know how easy that is to do with the current regulations. But I think if I'm the Ambanis, Wankhedi's great, so maybe they're the wrong owners here. Maybe if I'm Goenka, right, and I'm like, I own like a bit of Old Trafford, which obviously, you know, is an incredible district in Manchester, and I can do things with that ground going ahead, maybe especially as he buys more and more of that sort of organization. I think I'd be thinking, well, why can't I do this in India as well, you know, and have, you know, I don't think the Kroenkes have put in a bid on any of the two teams, RCB or Rajasthan, but an organization like the Kroenkes, right? You would assume that they would want the stadium, they would want the land. That seems to be their big thing as well. So yeah, I do think it will happen, but I don't know when. Athar says, is Abhishek's illness impacting his cognitive abilities? I saw him retracting his scapula twice in the first over. Sort of what you do when you are sick. I don't think we have enough retracting scapula talk on this podcast. And Athar, I'd like to thank you for that. You know, when you're sick, as a normal human being like most of us are watching this, when you are sick and something happens to you, and then you get non-sick, there's that bit between where you don't actually get back to how you felt before. And then suddenly you snap, right? And you're like, you actually feel better than you did before you were sick. And it's not really, you probably feel the same, but like you've gone through it. If you're an athlete, those little micro things, I think, can have a big part on your performance. And there are people who can play injured and sick and have it not affect them at all. You know, Gordon Greenidge, Michael Jordan in the flu game, whichever direction we want to have. Fast bowlers like Courtney Walsh, who just doesn't seem, no matter how sore they are, they're going to bowl exactly the same every single time. And then there are other people who need to feel 100%. You know, I've talked about this with Unwritten Nokia before. I think Unwritten Nokia, when fully fit, is one of the best 5 bowlers in the world. Unwritten Nokia, when 98% fit, I start to have questions. Unwritten Nokia, when 95% fit, I don't know if he can do, I don't even know if he can always perform at the level you would expect him to. Everyone is different. So it is very possible that he's not thinking as clearly as he used to. It's very possible he's not quite moving at the same rate. And it's a micro flash. And so the coaches and everyone else can't even tell. All these things are possible. ZXV says, how about ICC scrap T20 bilaterals and the World Cup and have a yearly IPL style league at different locations for 2 months? How would this impact cricket? So the first thing I would need to say here is the ICC don't run T20 bilaterals. Bilaterals have nothing at all to do with the ICC. So they can't. Have a yearly IPL style league at different locations for 2 months. That's kind of what the Saudi Arabia plan was. Look, I think the IPL will just have a longer IPL and it will just do some of this naturally. I think me and Robbie have talked about this before. IPL bilaterals and even ODI bilaterals, I think, should only be played before major tournaments now as preparation, especially in T20 cricket, where all the players are playing T20 cricket all the time anyway. So yeah. Athar says, why is it that in India's victory, one batter stands out every time, apart from the Zimbabwe game, but they fail to put in a collective effort? Because that's cricket sometimes. Like, they're going to play a couple of games where they don't do that. Wasn't there a game where Sanju Samson and Tilak Varma both made hundreds? It's just dumb luck. That's cricket. Anith says, 2 teams walk into the final. Which ones are they? Oh, I would say India and South Africa. Without any delegation, without anything there. Rohit says, hope Jar is safe. Don't see things easing off soon. I'm safe. I mean, Robbie is obviously in Dubai, and is having to live with all the issues that are going on over there at the moment. But yeah, I'm in London. So far, so good. No issues here. Samit says, belated birthday to my favorite athlete, AB de Villiers. I love how you're giving me money for his birthday. Never saw Viv live, but with due respect to Sachin, Lara, Ponting, AB was the best I've seen versus elite pace. Do you agree? What made him so dominant versus high pace, even on minefield? If only someone had written a book and talked to him about this. I think I've compared him before. I think AB de Villiers, Brian Lara, and Garfield Sobers are probably the three players since Bradman who have seen the ball the earliest. And if you're seeing the ball earlier than everyone else, I think that is a huge advantage. And I think there are other guys that are kind of around there. Maybe Viv, Richards, and Kohli would be two others, just off the top of my head. But when you have that much extra time, the fast ball doesn't seem as fast. And writing that book, talking to people who batted with Sobers, and Sobers giving them advice that they could not possibly replicate because Sobers was just so far ahead of them in the way that he was doing things, because he had this advantage that they did not have, right? So yeah, I'd certainly have AB right up there against elite pace. I think Kohli would be up there, Ponting and Viv as well. I wrote this in the book about Viv and Ponting specifically. There's this whole thing about Viv not being afraid of the short ball, not wearing the helmet and everything else. But if you and people talk about being courageous, it's not courageous. I don't think it was courageous for Viv to do that. It was part of the incredibleness of him is that he was seeing the ball so much quicker than everyone else that it didn't feel the same to him as it did to other people, right? And so there's all this about the swagger and everything else. It's like, yeah, but he didn't need to do that thing. And so, but AB talks about it, where he talks, the phrase AB said to me is, when he had the ability to slow everything down, he felt like Mitchell Johnson was bowling underarm to him. A lot of that is just time. It's the fact that those guys, for whatever reason, they get themselves into a headspace where they are just seeing what is going to happen so much before it does. And once you get there, it makes batting really, really easy compared to like every other person, right? You are quite literally playing a completely different game. Yash says, from rewarding with astronomical money to under-19 emerging players for defeating India to slapping a big fine on seniors for losing to them, any merit with running a board like a mafia fam. So I've just done a short video on Pakistan finding their players. I don't want to say the same gag that I always do, but I'm going to say the same gag I always do. You find me a Pakistani board member who has been done more things right than Babar Azam has in his cricket time, and I'll start to listen to anything that they say. They have been a pathetic board throughout my entire professional career, and certainly before it, right? They make horrible decisions. They then reverse those horrible decisions. They then triple down on those horrible decisions. All in the space of a week. They are unprofessional. They should not be running professional cricket. They do not understand sport. If you are fining players for being underwhelming, you fundamentally do not understand sport and should not be involved with the running of the game. And anyone involved in this decision, right, should instantly step down. And what I would like to see is fines for PCB board officials when they make mistakes, because they would all be broke. Anyway, we'll see you again next time here on the Wagon Wheel. We love the game, but we love the stories. Fans have stories. Former players have stories. Journalists have stories as well. Combox brings them all together. The game lives on.